Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner, and happy Halloween! Welcome to my Books Beside My Bed video, the last one for October. I'm actually filming this on Halloween, so I am wearing my cauldron earrings, which I'm really excited about. I've been waiting for any excuse. And this is also my 200th Books Beside My Bed video, so that's pretty exciting. Thank you to everyone who did send in questions over the last week. I have got them all. I'm going to be doing the Q&A at the end, so there'll be a timestamp down below. This video may get a little bit long, so please grab yourself a drink, settle in, jump around to whichever parts you're interested in. I have a lot of books to talk about and then I have a lot of questions to answer and I'm really excited. If you're new here, a Books Beside My Bed video is where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading. Those of you who are very familiar with it, welcome back. I had a pretty good reading week despite the fact that I actually don't even know what this week was. If anyone's been playing along, Victoria has had the 2020-2021 disaster bingo board going on, and this week we added hurricane style winds and thunderstorm asthma to the list. So I spent most of Thursday night and most of Friday during the day feeling like I was having an asthma attack, even though there is, you know, about a 3-month period during the year where I actually experience asthma symptoms, and I had all of them over those 48-hour period. It's been a week. We survived. We're here. The sun has decided to come out today, which is why the lighting is a little bit weirder than normal because it hasn't quite decided what it's going to do, but that's fine. We're going to talk about books and it's all going to be good. All right, so this is my reading week from the 23rd until the 29th of October. I read 12 things this week, 2,550 pages, and my yearly reading total is 441 books. This week I have both middle grade, young adult, and adult titles to share with you, so I am not going to recap them in order that I read them, but I'm actually going to group them sort of in those categories so that people can watch as they see fit. So the middle grade title that I read this week was The Astonishing Chronicles of Oscar from Elsewhere by Jacqueline Moriarty. And this one is illustrated by Kelly Canby as well. So it is a very lovely hardback, hardbound edition with illustrations the whole way through it. It is a fantasy series. This one is a little bit more urban fantasy and I'll explain why in a moment, but it is a part of this ongoing series that I have been reading and reviewing for Allen and Unwin for the last couple of years. The reason I say this is a bit more urban fantasy than some of the others is that we actually have a human character from the human world, actually from Australia, who steps into the Kingdoms and Empires fantasy world for this story. His name is Oscar and he is ditching school for the day and ends up finding a doorway into this world through a skate park. There he runs into Imogen and her sisters and her cousin and one of her friends as they are investigating a mysterious sleeping spell that has fallen over an elven town. And so they team up to go on a quest to find the 9 pieces of a key that will unlock this spell. And in doing so, whoever is able to unlock the spell will then become the next elven king. This is a really fun quest story. It exists in a world that has 3 previous books, and you can definitely read those and enjoy this. You can also read it on its own and enjoy it. I think you'll possibly get a little bit more enjoyment out of some of the side characters if you do know their stories, because all 3 of the main characters from the previous books are in this story, but they are not the main focus. So you can definitely enjoy it on its own. There are illustrations the whole way through the book. Some of them are double pages, some of them are single page illustrations. This is definitely one of those books for kids who love a really cool fantasy book. You have dual point of view from Imogen and Oscar, and they're both retelling the story to the audience like it's a report, because when Oscar returns to the human world, he has been told by his principal to explain exactly why he missed a week of school. It is really fun. It's really gorgeous. I love these books. Thank you very much to Allen and Unwin for sending me a review copy. The young adult title I read was Aurora's End by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. This is the 3rd and final book in the Aurora cycle. Again, this is a series I've been reviewing for Allen and Unwin. It is a young adult sci-fi series by Australian authors, and I have some thoughts on this, and it's kind of hard to discuss it because it is the 3rd and final book in a series, so I don't want to give spoilers away. Suffice to say, I came to Amy and Jay's work through the Illuminae Files, which is still one of my favourite sci-fi series, and I know at the moment there's some problematic elements with Jay Kristoff, so I'm going to leave that where it is for the moment. I still love the Illuminae Files a whole lot because I think that series did something absolutely incredible, and there are aspects of this series that I really, really love too, and in particular 2 characters who I just adore from the series. And finally in this book they actually get to play a bigger part, and they get to be a bigger part of the storyline, which is amazing. So the Aurora cycle started with Aurora Rising, and that was when soon-to-be graduate from sort of this galactic peacekeeping academy Tyler ends up running across this girl in the middle of a space storm, and her name is Aurora, and it turns out that she has been asleep for a very, very long period of time. And he takes her back to the academy, and he ends up being late. And so when they are choosing the new squads, he ends up with what they term the dregs. So basically it's a team of misfits working together to, you know, save space. Except of course this group of misfits then gets framed for a massive disaster and have to go on the run, and all of these weird things happen. So that's sort of where the basic premise of the story is. It's been a while since I read the first book, so my details are fuzzy, but that's the basic premise. In Aurora Burning, which was the second book, there was a plot line that was included that was not my favorite. It made me wonder whether or not I was going to be interested in this story. And the truth is, yes and no. I'm fully aware that I'm reading this young adult book as an adult. So I'm not the intended audience, and I know plenty of teenagers who would love this. There's a lot of good things going for it. What I noticed most this time around, the story is told through 3 different parallel storylines happening at the same time that eventually meet and converge, because all of the friends in the book have been split up into different groups. And 2 of those groups are the original characters having to work with some of their enemies in order to reach their desired outcome. So they're having to learn how to compromise a little bit more and how to be empathetic to other situations while still maintaining their integrity. I quite like that aspect. That said, those characters were the characters that I was not nearly as invested in as the third storyline, which is Finn and Zila's storyline. And Scarlett's in there as well. Scarlett I like, but she's also someone that I'm lukewarm on in terms of characterization. Zila in previous books has been described as neurodiverse in some way. She just views and sees the world in different ways, and her ability to socially interact with the others is different. And that was really intriguing about her. And they didn't really do as much with her as I would have hoped in the first 2 books, but she gets a much bigger part in this book. And Finn is an alien, but he's an outcast of his own people because he has a physical disability, and so he wears a brace so that he can walk in gravity. It's kind of made him bitter and snarky and sarcastic, and he has used that quite a bit throughout the series, but again, we finally see him come to the fore as a character and actually get to understand how he thinks, which I really liked. So this one obviously wraps up the trilogy. I think it could possibly have been a little bit shorter. I think there was a lot happening, but I think we spent too long in the downtime between the action sequences. But if you have to ask me whether I would take that and have more time with Finn and Zila, then yes, I probably would. It was the other storylines that kind of let me down just a little bit. That said, it's not terribly written. It is an enjoyable space opera adventure story. It's definitely for someone who likes those big sweeping sci-fi stories with timelines and time travel and explosions, and everything got answered. So I mean, I can't complain about that. I also read 3 Indigenous comics that I received from the Indigenous Literacy Foundation. I bought them. I did buy them myself. So these are comics by Indigenous writers and illustrators. I sort of had conflicting feelings about some of them. One of them I really, really enjoyed and would love to continue. The other 2, I think I need to go back and reread. As I said, this week was an interesting week, so I think I need to spend a little bit more time than I did unpacking these. One of them is Mixed Feelings. This is by Declan Miller. It is book 1, and it is about a young girl who is struggling to fit in at her school and ends up falling in with the wrong crowd and being manipulated. There is Exo Dimensions by Serafina Newberry, and this one is sort of like a dystopian type futuristic story where there are mutants and cyborgs, and it is set in Central Australia, which is really fascinating, and it really does delve into the past catching up with the future and all sorts of things. So this is one I definitely want to come back and revisit and spend a bit more time unpacking, because this is the one I think I missed the most just from reading it when I was tired, but I am very, very intrigued. My favourite of the 3 was Storm Warning by Lauren Boyle and Alyssa Mason. And this is about a girl who ends up helping a friend out in need right before this storm hits, and then everything is upended. And it's about friendship and about navigating new circumstances, and I was very, very, very intrigued and interested by this one. They all do have this slightly surreal feeling to them in the illustration styles, which is kind of cool. So I was looking at these potentially to include in our school library, but I think they're just a fraction too old for the kids in my school. Maybe the grade 6s, but they would end up in a collection that all the other kids would have access to. So just be aware of that when you go into it. But I think that they're really great starts to the series, and I'm looking forward to seeing what these authors do with them and also what ILF brings out in the future in terms of comics and graphic novels. Now we move into the books, and oh my goodness, this video is already so long, so I apologize in advance. I will try and get through some of these fairly quickly. So the first book that I read was Pretty Little Lions by Salika Snyder. This is Third Shift Book 2. I have not read Book 1. You don't have to. You kind of pick it up as you go along. This was a NetGalley arc that I received. It is a paranormal romance story featuring a lion shifter and an aspera. There are two storylines running. So Megan and Elijah's story is sort of the main focus of the story, and he is on guard duty at an event where she is undercover as the girlfriend of a very prominent criminal underworld boss, and he ends up blowing her cover, and they have to figure out what to do about that and how to salvage what's going on. And then the second storyline, or the second romance storyline, features an MMF couple, which is Grace Finian, and I've mentally blanked on the third character's name. He was sort of less of a main character. We mostly get Grace and Finian's point of view for this relationship. She is a doctor slash healer, and and Finn is a vampire, and the third partner in the relationship is a lawyer for Third Shift. So this one features shifters, supernaturals, vampires, spies and secret agents and rebellions. It was fun. I wish the Grace and Finian and the third person's relationship had been the main relationship. That one was far more interesting than Megna and Elijah's, but that's just personal preference. I also read I Married a Birdman by Regine Abel. This is Prime Mating Agency Book 3. You guys know by now I love this series, and it just seems with every book, Regine Abel seems to make them sweeter and more adorable, and I just loved this. So this is one of those alien monster romance stories. The hero, Dacus, is a birdman. So he is actually a hybrid. I forget what the name of his race was, but he's half human, half alien. You just have to look at the cover, and the artwork for this character is gorgeous. So Luana is part of a human settlement on Dacus's world, and they're currently under threat by a third group of inhabitants who are constantly attacking them. Luana's father, who is the town leader, has been injured, and she's the healer, and she decides to go and ask Dacus's people for assistance. They typically leave themselves out of human affairs, but she goes up there and begs for their assistance, and while she's there, Dacus realizes that she is his mate, and the whole thing goes from there, and the Prime Mating Agency and Kyog get involved, and it's just so sweet. I actually don't even have words. This was just a joy to read during the week. It just made everything seem a little bit better, and you wouldn't think that because it is a weird romance, but it just worked. Then Jessica Gaziella sent out the 10th book in the professional series to her reviewer group, and this is The Executioner, and this is the book that I have been waiting for since I started the series. It is Bellamy's book. Bellamy is a very fascinating character for me because he is this very rich, very handsome guy who was in the military, who did horrendous things, is the team's executioner, and that's quite literal. They call him in when they need someone gone. And yet he is also a very light character just outside of that role. And he loves his friends so much. But what he does with his friends, kidnapping his friends is his love language. He kidnaps them, he drugs them, kidnaps them, and then takes them on holidays when he thinks they need a break. Which, you know, in real life, not okay. But in a book character is kind of adorable. So in this one, he's sent on a job and he's there to execute someone for his team. But when he gets there, someone else beats him to it. And her name is Sean. And he helps her escape. And then he decides that she needs a break. And so he kidnaps her and takes her away. And she's obviously having none of this. She's so pissed and basically spends the entire time trying to escape from him and basically gets him back, which was a truly, truly wonderful scene. When she gets back home to the States, she realizes that the man that she killed isn't actually dead. And so she and Bellamy team back up in order to try and bring this guy down. So it is a romantic suspense. It does have dark elements in it. You would think with all the kidnapping, drugging and murder that it would be darker than it is, but this one honestly felt so light in tone, and I just love spending time with Bellamy because he is just a delightful character. For all of his internal darkness, you can see that he just cares so much about his friends and the people that are in his life. So that's always fun to read about in one of these stories because you have this real contrast in job and personality. So I really liked that. I also read Mischief by Tiffany Reese. In fact, I read a whole stack of Original Sinners pulp library books by Tiffany Rice this week, so I'm just going to talk about all of them. Mischief is her Halloween novella. It is about Nora and Nico. Nora is a dom and Nico is one of her submissives. Nico is French. He's never experienced an American Halloween, so he flies out and she takes him to Salem and they spend Halloween weekend there celebrating through Halloween parties. There is an FFM element in this story. It was really fun. There was ghost hunting involved. I enjoyed it. It's super short, well worth checking out. I also read Immersed in Pleasure and Submit to Desire. This actually has 2 novellas in this little tiny book. Immersed in Pleasure is Derek and Xenia's book. Xenia is a mermaid at one of the clubs owned by Kingsley, who is a prominent figure in the series. It's a kink club, but no one actually touches the girls there. They swim around in tanks and men pay to sit there and watch them, as you do. Derek ends up stumbling into this world and meets Xenia and falls in love with her, and it is their story. And then in Submit to Desire, we spend more time with Kingsley, who owns stacks of nightclubs and kink clubs, and he ends up taking a new submissive, Charlotte, and he's training her, and then they end up with sort of a happy for now. Both of these are happy for now. They're erotic stories with some hint of romance, but just from knowing all of the other stories, I know that Charlotte and Kingsley's relationship is possibly under question in later books. I should just read them in order, but clearly I'm not, because there is an entire novel series that I have not read. I'm just reading all of the shorts around it at the moment. I also read The Mistress Files by Tiffany Rice, again in that same universe. This one features 5 short stories. Nora, the dom, is also an author, and she has been asked to tell the stories of some of her experiences working in Kingsley's dungeon. We get 5 different stories. They're all very different. They all feature slightly different kinks, and you have Nora working with married couples, and you have part of her relationship with Kingsley. You have rock stars and actresses and all sorts of things happening in these short stories, and they were really fun. And the final Original Sinners book that I read this week was The Last Good Night. This is Nora and Lance. Lance is a new employee for Kingsley. He is in charge of security for one of his nightclubs, and he stumbles across Nora and she takes an instant liking to him. He's an ex-SEAL, but he is a submissive in the bedroom, and she delights in this. He's also a single dad, and there is a plotline in here around him trying to find a way to get rights to see his daughter again, and it was great. This one does not end in an HEA or an HFN, so just be aware of that going into it. So this is purely an erotic novella. Oh my gosh, I got through all the books. I got to the end there and I was like, oh my, I'm missing something, but I'm not. I got through all of them. Okay, so now we're going to jump into the Q&A portion of this. So I did ask people to send in questions that they had for me, because as this is the 200th episode, I thought it would be a really great opportunity to answer any questions that you guys have. I want to preface this by saying my very first Books Beside My Bed video went up on this channel on January the 8th, 2018. I will leave that linked on the screen. Honestly, guys, I don't know if you want to go back and rewatch it. I certainly haven't, but it's there if you want to see it. All right, so into the questions. Ashley asked, how has the format of this video changed over time? Honestly, there's not a huge amount of difference in terms of the format of the video. I still give stats and I still recap all of the books, usually in chronological order, unless I've got a huge mix of readership things, and then I try and do it by that order so that if people only want to see the middle grade and young adult stuff, it's grouped together, and the adult stuff is grouped together as well. I did used to include currently reading titles in the video if I was reading something, but typically I don't have things hanging over into the filming time of this video now, so that doesn't happen. I also used to include star ratings, but I don't anymore. I have a whole video on that if you're interested in it. I'm trying to think if anything else is different. No, it's probably more just filming time-wise. I used to film my wrap-ups for a week that ran Sunday to Saturday. I've slightly tweaked that this year so that now I'm running it from Saturday to Friday, just in terms of what I recap, what my week block is. And that's because if I get the chance to film on Saturdays now, I do. It also makes it a little bit easier if I'm doing a weekend reading vlog to separate out those times and just sort of keep numbers and stats and things easy for me to navigate. But aside from that, that's pretty much it. Susan asked if I have a preference between e-reader or physical books. If you'd asked me, 5 or 6 years ago, my preference definitely would have been physical books, and I still don't mind reading physical books. I actually like the physical object of a book. but I do definitely find it easier and quicker to read on my e-reader or my Kindle, so I tend to gravitate towards that more now, and I have to remind myself to read my physical books. Victoria asked, what are some books that you'll definitely be reading before the end of the year? Archangel's Light by Nalini Singh, which I'm planning on reading this week because it's just come out. Katie Roberts' Queen, she's just announced that she's finished it, and I'm really eager to read that one. That's a paranormal erotica horror thing. Sierra Simone also announced another Christmas anthology, 12 Naughty Days, with a whole bunch of authors that I'm really intrigued to try, so that one would be fun. And also Love Flushed by Evie Mitchell is coming out in November as well. This is the follow-up to Not My Type, and I would love to read that as well. Tracy asked how my reading has changed over the last 4 years in terms of genres and ebooks and physical books. So I've sort of talked very briefly about the ebooks and physical books. I've definitely become more of an ebook reader. So when I started out, I was mostly reading young adult fantasy and adult sci-fi. And then I sort of moved a little bit into YA contemporary and kept the sci-fi books, and I've never really dropped the adult sci-fi books. I sort of dip in and out of them when I find something that I'm interested in. I was reading some young adult sci-fi. I'm a little bit hit and miss on that, but if something sounds interesting, I might give it a try. I've definitely moved well away from fantasy. It's definitely not something I gravitate towards naturally. I will still pick it up, but it's under very specific conditions. I have definitely moved well and truly into romance books of all subgenres in the last couple of years because I think I've needed something light. I've also shifted away from young adult titles, typically unless they are Australian young adult titles. My relationship with young adult books is kind of difficult to describe. I try to stick to reading Australian young adult books because I want to support the publishing industry here. I want to be able to support anything that's doing really important work in terms of diversity, but I also am kind of wary that my natural inclination is to rate young adult lower just because I'm not the intended audience. So I have to be really careful because it's just a fine line that I have to walk in terms of navigating my thoughts in my head. The other interesting thing that I think I've noticed is that I have definitely moved away from longer books to shorter books. I used to be able to read tomes like nobody's business. These days I just don't have the patience for it. I will still pick them up, but I have to work myself up to anything that's sort of longer than 400 pages. Nothing wrong with long books, I just have to be in the right mental headspace to do it. Julie asked, what book are you most excited to read next week, or in general? The book I'm most excited to read next week is Archangel's Light by Nalini Singh. It is the next book in her Guild Hunters series. I have pre-ordered this book in multiple formats. I have the US mass market, I have the UK tradeback coming, and I also have it in ebook form, mostly because I loved the artwork on both books, and you'll see in my book haul I have one of them that's already arrived. I wanted to have both copies of the books. I also have a couple of books that are coming out next year that I'm really excited about. Aurelia Ryder series book 2 will hopefully be out next year by Ilona Andrews. And then Katie Robert also has Electric Idol and The Dragon's Bride coming out. Both of those are books that I want to read in 2022. Beck asked, what's a book or what are some books that you love the fonts of? Which fonts do you like in terms of title and author's name? This was kind of hard for me because typically I'm happy with something plain. I like titles that stand out. I don't like it when people try and hide them in there, and I don't like when they fade into the background because I want the title to grab my attention. So if it fades into the background and my eyes sort of glance over it, then that's, to me, that's not the greatest thing. But I did pull some examples. I think it depends on the book. That I like things to fit the title. It will surprise no one that I like the Psy Changeling UK tradebacks. I like the simplicity of the font, but it has a little bit of detailing on the back. The covers are mostly fairly plain, so the title stands out, and I like that on each of the books the title is a different color. A couple of years ago I would have said a sans serif font because that's typically what I find visually appealing and what I like to work with when I'm creating things. But I think in terms of titles, a lot of the things that I look at are serif, and I don't mind them as long as they're on a background that's easy to read. Something like The Worst Best Man, where the title is big and bold. This is an illustrated cover obviously, but it fits in with exactly what's happening on the front cover, so I really like that. And this is another illustrated cover, but I like this in terms of incorporating the title design and the font choice into the overall cover, and it is the Heart Principle because I like that it all sort of fits into this heart shape with the illustrations. It's easy to read, it's clear, the color doesn't fade into the background, so even though it's a script font, it's very, very easy to read. So my basic preference is anything that's easy to read and doesn't fade into the background because my attention wanders. Stace asked, what's one book that sticks out for you for any reason, emotional, nostalgic, thought-provoking, or just simply enjoyable? And I think I have to give that one to Ted Chiang's Stories of Your Life and Others, which is a speculative fiction anthology. This one features the title story, Stories of Your Life, which is what the film Arrival was based on, and that is one of my all-time favorite films. I did make sure I read the short story first, and I absolutely loved it. Now, I don't love absolutely everything in the collection. In fact, I can probably talk about the reasons why I liked individual stories, but collectively as a whole, it's very, very thought-provoking. I think he does an incredible job of weaving these speculative fiction stories that are set on Earth with these fantastical elements that make you think about the world. It's not always the kind of sci-fi I gravitate towards because I quite like space opera type stuff as well, but when speculative fiction is done well, I love it. And I think I enjoy it more in short form than I do in long form, which is why this sort of stands out. Plus, I have bought about 4 or 5 copies of this book since I read it. The reason being, the first copy that I bought, I lent to someone and they never gave it back. You would think that I would learn, but I keep lending out books and never getting them back. But that's fine because I let the person keep it because I love that book and I don't mind sharing it. They just had to deal with the fact that I'd tabbed it all up to hell, and I won't explain to them why and what each colour means. They can figure it out themselves if they're keeping my book. And then I bought myself a new copy, and then I found a limited edition cover copy, and it's just sort of spiraling. Every time I find a new edition of it, I kind of add it to my collection because it's just one of those really special stories for me. Anne asks, hi Steph, as a fellow teacher considering starting a channel, I'd like to know how your colleagues and students or the parents say, comment on the videos or the multiple types of reads that you present here. In all honesty, I don't actually go around announcing to people in my life that I have a YouTube channel. Yes, there are parents and students and staff members at school who know that I have a channel. Typically with the older kids, they usually stumble across my channel and then they try and find me somewhere and try and startle me by telling me that they know. So typically speaking, it's the grade 6 kids and they want to get a reaction from me. And usually I just go, yeah. And they kind of look at me strangely like, you mean you're not going to deny it? And I'm like, no, I've got a channel. And then they back right off. My content is not particularly engaging for kids, I wouldn't imagine, with the exception of perhaps some of my standalone kids book reviews, which one of my teachers has used one of my middle grade reviews with her class before, and they used it in an educational setting and she was controlling the video and all of that, so that's fine. But typically speaking, I don't think my content is all that engaging for kids, so I don't think that they would be of interest to this. I have had a couple of parents come and see me and talk to me about it, and they're parents that I have a really good relationship with. They're also, you know, fairly open-minded and whatever, so the types of reads that I present here I don't think would bother them. Also, we're all adults. In terms of staffing, most of my friends know that I have a channel, but I don't actually think they watch it. I don't even think they'd know how to find the channel if they wanted to. And interestingly enough, my family know I have a channel, but none of them watch it. I don't think they've ever seen a single video. So I think it depends on how you want to play it. I don't make it a big deal. This I do for fun, this is my stress relief when I'm not working, and I do it all in my own time. It doesn't take up any of my work time and it doesn't have an impact on that. So I don't make a big deal about it and it's not a big deal. So I think it really comes down to how you want to approach it. I haven't had an issue with it so far. Doesn't mean it won't come up in the future, but for now it just is what it is. And I've been very fortunate in that respect. All right, Brie has a couple of questions for me. The first one is, what 3 things we likely don't know about you? It's one of those things, I was trying to think back, what don't I mention here on this channel? So growing up, I learnt how to play the violin. This was when I was in primary school and early high school. And while I would dearly love to say that I'm a musical person, I'm really not. I struggle a lot with anything that's like learning a new language. It's just something that my brain doesn't do naturally. That includes actual different languages or music as a language or anything like that. I find it really hard to concentrate on learning those things. So while I played the violin for, you know, nearly 8 years, it was never something that I truly enjoyed, and obviously not something that I continued doing. I also tried to learn the piano, and I can read music. Like I can actually physically read it. I understand it. I'm just not all that interested in playing it, and I take my hat off to everyone who is, because my patience is just not there. I'll throw this in as a bonus. I went to 2 primary schools and 2 high schools, and one of those high schools was in Sydney. And when I returned to Melbourne for year 9 to year 12, I went to a Catholic girls' school, so basically private school. And, you know, we had to you had to do all these extracurricular activities to, you know, appease the people in charge, which is another reason why I don't teach in high school. One of the things that I did was I joined the choir. I can hold a note if I want to. I will never be singing in public again, but I can do it if I need to. And I was in the chamber choir because I just, you know, needed the extra points or whatever. Anyway, I ended up as in the chamber choir, and I did enjoy it. It was a really fun group of girls, and I really liked the music teachers and people in charge of that. So that was a fun experience for sort of my last couple of years of high school. And prior to becoming a teacher, I actually started a Bachelor of Communication Media, and I loved it. I loved all of the things I was learning in it, and in fact I use a lot of them when I'm editing videos. But I worked out very, very quickly in the sort of the first 5 months that I was never, ever going to be cut out for working in the industry. And I got the hell out of there. And I scared the crap out of my parents because I called my mum one morning in an absolute panic and just said, I'm going to unenroll because I am not going to spend 3 years doing this course to not have anything to do at the end of it. I would rather take 6 months off and think about exactly what I want to do and start fresh the following year and go into something that I know I can make a career of, which is how I got into teaching. So I worked a couple of part-time jobs for 6 months after my first year of high school. But I literally made that decision in the morning. I was sitting in a lecture theatre. I had this epiphany moment and I walked up to the registrar's office and said, I need to unenroll. And I don't know if my mother has ever forgiven me for that, although she can't be too upset with me because my decision has led to a career, you know, that has spanned 12 years now and lots of opportunities. Bree also asked, what are your favourite kind of booktube videos to watch versus film? I love watching vlogs. I do not love filming vlogs. Well, actually, no, I don't like editing vlogs. I don't mind the filming part of them. I don't like editing them, but I love watching everyone's vlogs because I like getting to know people. I think they're really fun and a great way to sort of get an insight into someone that otherwise you only know through, you know, sit down chat videos, which is fine. It's totally fine. And I think everyone has their own comfort level with vlogs as well. So respect to anyone who wants to film them. So I do like watching those more than I like putting them together. I also love how some people can put together really creative videos and who might even get into character or things like that. Skits and things. That's just not in my wheelhouse, but I love watching them. And then her last question is, who's your favorite person to read weird romances with? A, me, B, also me. Brie, it's you. I love reading weird romances with you. I think we just feed off each other's weird romance interests at this point. So I think we should just continue to do that. Marie asks, what's one book you wish you could read for the first time again? And I think that one would have to be The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This is one of my favorite sci-fi books. It just has such nostalgic memories for me. And it's been a while since I reread it. So that might have to be something that happens fairly soon. It's just a gorgeous book and it's all about found family. And it's one of those few books where the story is literally just this group of people traveling through space. It takes a long time. There's not a huge amount that happens in terms of big action plots, but it is just gorgeous because it is the quiet moments. And not everyone can do that, but Becky Chambers does it so well. Izzy asks, how tall am I? So I'm about 5'6". And she also asked, what is my favorite booktube content to make? I love making my weekly wrap-ups. I like doing art and craft type videos inspired by books. I used to do planner layouts and book defacings and all that sort of stuff. I like doing them, but they're also a bit time consuming at the moment, so I haven't done them for a while, but maybe if I get inspired, I'll go back to them. I also really like doing live shows. I like the opportunity to interact with other people. I'm a fairly shy, introverted person, but I think I found some really good friends online who I have a good rapport with, so that makes live shows really fun. But even just doing them by myself and having people to talk to while I'm doing something is really nice as well. Rachel asks, what is a book that you love that other booktubers have given bad reviews? And this one I honestly wasn't sure. I couldn't think of something. So I ended up going back to Goodreads and just sort of sorting things. And I think some of the ones that came down to Four Dead Queens by Astrid Scholt. I actually don't remember hearing people talk about it on BookTube. It has sort of average-ish ratings on Goodreads. It was a book that I really enjoyed at the time. And that's key. It's a young adult fantasy book by an Australian author. So two things that I don't typically read now. So if I read it now, I think my rating would be slightly different. But I remember I really enjoyed it at the time of reading. Same thing with The Devouring Grey by Christine Lynn Herman. That was a book that I really enjoyed reading at the time. I can do it in the opposite. I can tell you books that I didn't like that other people really enjoyed, but it's kind of harder to do it in the reverse. So yeah, I'm sorry that's not a proper answer. I honestly, I've been thinking about it since I read your question, and I've really struggled to think of an answer. And finally, Heather has asked me a bunch of questions. Her first one is my favorite alpha. That would be Caleb Krychek from Heart of Obsidian by Nalini Singh, because he is morally grey, very much so. And I love him. He is my morality chain book hero. When did I start reading romance? In terms of it being my main genre, 2020. In terms of when did I start actually picking up romance books here and there, it's probably been maybe since 2018, but it was definitely not a main genre, and it was definitely just sort of the odd book here or there. It probably would have been maybe 5 to 10 books a year, if that. And considering I was, still reading at that stage 200, 300 books a year, it was not a significant portion. So definitely last year was a big year in terms of jumping over into romance. And I can't say that I regret it. There's just so many amazing books to choose from. Sweet or salty snack? I am a salt fiend, so I will pick salty things over sweet things any day of the week. But that said, every now and then I do crave something sweet. And then finally, who is a favourite new to author of 2021? I'm going to go with Evie Mitchell, because I always like finding new to me Australian authors writing in genres that I love. Evie Mitchell is writing in romance, and it is amazing. I loved finding out that she was Australian. I'm enjoying all of her books. It just brings me so much joy to be able to A, support an Australian author, but also to just have a huge backlog of titles that I can go through, and that's what I've been doing. All right, so that is this week's wrap up and Q&A, and I apologize for the length, but it was really fun to go through your questions. And at any point, if anyone has any other questions, you're always very welcome to leave them down below for me. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.